All right, so today we're talking about rules for a good argument, because for this class, I'm going to put a lot of arguments on the board, and you're going to have to write a paper where you're creating your own argument. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about arguments that other people have, arguments that you have. And argument, usually when people talk about getting in an argument, it means something bad, right? So, like, if you told me you got in an argument with your roommate last night, right? What would you all think that meant? He got in an argument with a roommate. What happened? What would you guess?
I boxed it up.
Boxed it up. All right, so it could have gotten physical, all right, but not necessarily. Even if it wasn't physical, what would happen?
They had a disagreement.
They had a disagreement. And was it nice? No. Right? So typically, argument means it's emotional, conceivably physical, hopefully not, but yeah, it could be. So normally, when people use the word argument, they mean it like a heated emotional discussion or disagreement or debate even. But in this class, argument means something different. You all need to keep track of this in your notes. An argument is simply ideas intended to support a conclusion. So an argument is just ideas where the author of the ideas is intending to support a conclusion. Now, with that definition of an argument, it's just ideas. So when someone presents an argument, they may or may not be emotional about it. They may not be trying to make it into a big thing. They could be just calm and cool, here are my ideas. All right, so argument is just ideas intended to support a conclusion. And what we're going to do in this class is spend a lot of time talking about arguments, other people's arguments, your arguments. So today is kind of like vocabulary day, where we're going to learn what I call the rules for a good argument. The rules for a good argument, because we need some common vocabulary so that when we're talking about an argument and you say you like it, but you say you don't like it, we need the vocabulary so that you two are speaking directly to each other, so that it's not like this. So the vocabulary is needed so that we're all kind of understanding what we're saying when we're saying we like the argument or don't like the argument. All right, so arguments, just ideas to support a conclusion. And some ideas, some arguments are going to work out, and some aren't. Okay? And we need to be able to talk about that. And I want to just give you a rough idea of what the rules are about before I get into them, more formally, right? So let's think about this. So a successful argument is where the ideas actually support the conclusion. Okay? Now, what if somebody has good ideas, but it has nothing to do with the conclusion? Would that be a good argument? No, right? So if the conclusion was something like, today is Wednesday. So they're trying to make a point that today is Wednesday. And they give the following ideas. It's sunny outside, and if it's sunny outside, then I'm happy. Conclusion, today's Wednesday. What's the problem with that?
Not related.
Yeah, it's what people call random, right? So those ideas have nothing to do with the conclusion. The conclusion is supposed to be about today's Wednesday. It's an argument for why today's Wednesday, and we had ideas about the sun and my being happy and nothing about Wednesday, all right? So one thing we notice is that in order for an argument to succeed or be good, the ideas that it starts with need to be well connected to the conclusion. All right? There can't be a randomness. They have to support that conclusion. The other requirement for a good argument is that the ideas that are used to support the conclusion need to make sense. Okay? So if I'm trying to prove to you that today's Wednesday, and what if I said something like, if there's, let's see, if President Ralph is doing a dance in his office, then today's Wednesday. President Ralph is doing a dance in his office, therefore, today's Wednesday. What's the problem with that? The ideas support the conclusion, but what's the problem with the argument? Yeah.
Like, there's no real relevance to the fact he's dancing to do the date on Wednesday.
Yeah, right. So it starts out with the idea that if he's dancing in his office, then today's Wednesday. Why in the world would you ever think that? You have no reason to think that if he dances, then it's Wednesday. Unless he tells you, the only day I dance and every day I dance is Wednesday. Like, that's the only day I dance, and I dance in my office all day Wednesday. Like, if he told you that, maybe you'd have some evidence for that. But it's highly unlikely. How about the premise that President Ralph is dancing in his office right now? Do you believe that? I don't. Kind of unlikely. I mean, he's a positive person, but I don't know that he's always dancing. Right? So those ideas, while they do support the conclusion, aren't good ideas. We just don't believe those ideas. Right? So the two rules that I've got here are basically articulating those two requirements for a good argument. One requirement is that the ideas have to support the conclusion. The second requirement, except I mixed up the order, but the other requirement is that the ideas have to be good. Okay? All right, so let me read you the rules so that you can get them in your notes right, because as you can see, my handwriting is, I never did particularly well with handwriting. Did you guys still get handwriting grades? I did. It was always a C. In elementary school, you got a handwriting grade. It was C with some narrative about he needs to work on his F's or he needs to work on it, and I just never did. All right, rules for a good argument. An argument is good for you if and only if 1 and 2. So just right off the bat, in order for an argument to be good, it's got to obey both rules. And if it messes up one of them, then it's not a good argument. All right, the first rule is that all of the premises are reasonable for you to believe. Second rule is that the argument has a logical pattern such that if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. Or more simply, a lot of times I'll say the argument's valid, or I'll say the conclusion follows. This shouldn't make any sense to you right now. All right, so what I'm going to do today is basically give you examples to explain this. The examples that I'm going to give you are going to be simple, silly examples, not terribly important. After today, we'll get into far more interesting arguments. Okay, but today is just like vocabulary day. We're learning this stuff. Simple arguments. So let me give you an example of an argument. All right, check that out. It's an argument. It's not important, but it is one. If pizza is served in the cafeteria, then Scott is happy. Pizza is served in the cafeteria, therefore Scott is happy. So let me clarify some vocabulary here. Number one is a premise. A premise just means like an assumption or a reason, or like I said, an idea, right? And number two is a premise. Number three is the conclusion. So in this class, you'll always get two indicators that there's a conclusion. One is I always use the word therefore, and the other is I always put a line above it. Okay? So you'll always be able to see what the conclusion is. So there's the conclusion. Now the whole thing is the argument. Again, an argument is ideas intended to support a conclusion. The premises are the ideas, and then there's the conclusion. Okay, so the whole thing, this happens to be a three-step argument with two premises and a conclusion. 3 is not a premise. It's just a conclusion. All right, so I'm going to ask you guys questions, and I'm going to ask you to vote by nodding your head or shaking your head to my questions, if that's all right. I kind of like voting like this. So I want to start off with Rule 2. And so what I'm asking you here is, for this argument, is it set up so that it's valid? Or, in other words, if these premises are true, does this conclusion have to be true? All right, so look at that, and then if you think it's valid, do this, and then if you don't think it is, then do that. So I'm just going to look around the room in a sec and see what you think about that. Whenever you want to vote is good. So I'm asking you, if number 1 and number 2 are true, does 3 have to be true? Tell me what you think. Anthony's voting. We got some votes. Got votes, more votes. Votes coming in. Negative. Okay, anyone else want to vote? It's easy to vote. It's free to vote. Nothing bad happens if you vote. All right, it's kind of mixed here. All right. Cool. Let me tell you the answer. The answer is that it's actually valid. All right, so here's what I mean by that. What I mean is that if we go along with number 1 and number 2, then number 3 has to be true. So I'm not saying that for sure I'm that way. I'm just saying if I were that way, then we would get this conclusion. So what number 1 is saying is basically every single time pizza's served in the cafeteria, I'm happy. So let's suppose that that's true. Every single time there's pizza, I'm happy. And now let's suppose that there's pizza. If we go along with those premises, where is it? If the premises are true, then it has to be the case that I'm happy. All right, so we would say it's valid, which means we're saying it's okay as far as Rule 2 goes. All right, now I'm going to ask you to vote for Rule 1. Okay? So now I'm asking you, are the premises reasonable for you to believe? Number 1 and number 2. So those are the 2 premises. All right, go ahead and vote again. Look at those 2 premises and tell me if you think that the premises are reasonable for you to believe. We got some votes coming in. Whenever you're ready to vote, no rush. Some yeses. All right, let's give people to decide. All right, so we voted. Yeah. A lot of people voting yes. Nobody voting no. You got a no? All right, Shaq, tell me. And you voted no too? All right, I want to hear from the no's. Let's start with you, Shaq. Why do you say that there's a premises that you don't believe?
Can I say that as like thorough? Because
No, it's got to be either number 1 or number 2. Okay. What are you worried about?
Scott always happy with pizzas.
Why is that? Does that seem weird that I'd be always happy every time pizza's served? All right, let's think about why that's weird. All right, let's talk as a class about what's weird about that. Well, what number 1 is saying is every single time there's pizza, I'm happy. Couldn't there be a time where pizza's served but I'm not happy? Okay, what would be a time like that?
Your dog died.
Dog die. Oh, man.
That was dark.
You're killing me. I have an old dog, so that's a sensitive topic right now. All right, dog died, but pizza's served. That doesn't mean I'm happy, right? I'm going to be sad that the dog died. All right, what else?
it's undercooked.
Oh, yeah, they screwed up the pizza, right? So I'm all looking forward to that pizza, and then the pizza doesn't taste good. Yeah. It wasn't the only pizza they had was like pepperoni, and I actually don't like pepperoni. So, no, I don't like that. It's kind of weird. How can you love pizza and not like pepperoni? I don't like pepperoni.
Say something.
Yeah. So they're serving a kind of pizza that I don't like. So that's the only thing they got. I'm not happy with that. Well, another one is anchovies. Now I don't like that, and a lot of people don't like that. And that'd be kind of weird if the cafeteria only served anchovy pizza. But there would be a revolt of some sort, I think.
Oh, never.
Maybe. Who knows? All right. So what am I getting at here? The problem with this argument is that when we think about premise one, we find that we don't actually believe it. Premise one is what's called an if-then sentence, or in other words, a conditional sentence, okay? And anytime you see a conditional sentence in this class, what it tells you is whenever the if part is true, the then part is true. And the problem we have with premise one is we can imagine situations where pizza's served in the cafeteria, but Scott's not happy. Dog died, served the wrong kind of pizza, I don't know, got in a car accident earlier that day. I mean, there's just, somebody fussed at me. And there's all kinds of things. And it's actually, if you're ever in a really good mood and you want to get out of the good mood, make a list of the things that make you unhappy. And then you make the list and you start thinking, man, that makes me unhappy. And that, you end up getting unhappy. It's sort of like the reverse of self-help. It's like how to make yourself feel bad. Most people don't want that, but anyway. Now, the one thing I don't know about is number two. Is pizza served in the cafeteria? Was pizza served today? It was served today. Is it it's an everyday thing now. When I started at Peace, it wasn't. And that's why I still think like this. I'm like, okay, is pizza going to be served or not? Because it was like a real question. And it was once, maybe twice a week is how often we get pizza. And I wanted pizza. So, I would get especially excited those days. So now you guys, you take pizza for granted. It's
Terrible pizza.
What's that?
It's terrible pizza.
Yeah. I mean, it's not my ideal
It's
pizza.
better than my high school pizza, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's right.
Definitely.
It's funny. I liked that cafeteria pizza back in high school, but I think it's because it was so much better than everything else. I just preferred that. All right, so what are we saying about this argument? We're saying it's valid, but not good, because premise one is not reasonable. In order for an argument to be good, all of the premises have to be reasonable for you to believe, and we found a problem with premise one. Now, I asked you about whether or not pizza is served in the cafeteria. And I didn't personally know that we have a thing now where we always offer pizza every single day. To me, I was going by the old way, where sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. So notice that from my perspective, if I look at premise two, I'm not sure. But from your perspective, because you know about the cafeteria, you are sure about premise two. And so what I would say, if I were evaluating this argument, but you wouldn't, is I would also add that premise two isn't reasonable either. And so what I want to highlight here is that there is an intentional relativity in the rules. So an argument could be good for one person but not for another, depending on the evidence. My evidence is sort of like old evidence. Like I'm going by the old ways the cafeteria operated, and I wasn't at the cafeteria today. So I'm like honestly 50-50 on whether or not pizza was served today. But you all know what's up with the cafeteria, and you were likely there today, and so you've got evidence that pizza was served. So it's reasonable for you to believe premise two, but not for me. Does that make sense? And so there's a serious point here, which is that sometimes an argument could be good for one person because they've got a certain body of information, but then not good for another person because they're lacking that information. When we get into the more serious arguments, we're going to see situations like this where one person will know more about certain stuff that leads them to think the argument's good, and another person might not. And so it can depend. Yeah. All right, we're gonna play the game again, except I'm gonna switch things up. Are you all okay with that? All right. What am I doing here? Switch 2 and 3. All right, we're going to start off with Rule 2 again. So I'm going to ask you about Rule 2, and basically I'm asking you, is it valid? Or in other words, if these premises are true, does the conclusion have to be true? All right, so take a second or two, look at that, think about it, tell me what you think. Whenever you're ready to vote, go for it. All right, we got it. Anyone else want to vote? Not everyone voted on this one. This one, I guess, got a little harder. So, what? Number 2.
We're applying number 2.
Yeah, so I'm asking, is the argument valid? If the premises are true, does the conclusion have to be true? We got a number of no's. Good. The answer is, in fact, no. Let me write that out. So it is invalid. All right, who wants to say why? What's the problem? Yeah.
I feel like you can be happy for a number of different reasons.
Good. So I could be happy,
Yeah.
but then I'm not happy because of the pizza, it's because of something else.
Yeah.
All right, good job. What could be making me happy?
Could be serving
Yeah? What's that?
Kids.
Who? Kids. Yes, my kids could have made me happy. They, did something nice for me or said something nice to me. Yeah.
You could have got a raise.
A raise? That'll do it. Yeah. Anything. A bonus. Little bonus. Something. Yeah, those things, even little things make a difference. I remember one time working for someone where I'd never received any kind of raise or any kind of anything, and it was like a $5 gift card, and it made my day because it was symbolic. It wasn't so much how much it was just being recognized like that. I was like, whew, nice. And it really didn't cost hardly anything at all. So yeah, those things make a difference. All right, what else could make me happy? What's that?
We'll recognize your importance by giving you a $5 gift card.
Yeah, I know. Well, hopefully it's not like, this is how important you are to me. Here's $5. It would be like, wish I could give you more. Here's $5. That'd be better. All right. So what else could make me happy, even though, what are we saying? Pizza's not served, and I'm still happy? Is that what we're saying? Yeah. All right. So what's going on? Kids are nice. I got a $5 bonus. What else?
Your wife ordered pizza at home.
Yes, so I got pizza, but not from the cafeteria. Yeah. I have to say I'm not entirely satisfied with pizza in this area. My favorite pizza place right now is the I Love New York Pizza on Hillsborough. Does anyone know that? It's got great big New York style slices. So I like that. I like the size of it. But yeah, all right. My favorite pizza, in case you're wondering. Does anyone care?
Okay.
No,
Go for it.
all right. My favorite pizza is Lito's Pizza in Maryland. But, you got to go back to Maryland to get Lito's Pizza. So I just went back over the break and was with my in-laws, and it's like a block away from the Lito's Pizza, which actually moved. I grew up right there, and it moved from one location to another location. And I was so worked up about that because I was worried that they weren't going to make it good any longer because they moved, right? And I actually went in and talked to the owner, one of the owners, there's two owners, of Lito's Pizza, and I asked him what I thought was the critical question. When you moved, did you move the ovens? And he assured me they did. And so I relaxed. I was like, all right, now I'm going to get some Lito's Pizza. I don't know if you're, have you had Lito's Pizza before, Anthony?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. He's Marylander. He knows. So if you ever get over to Maryland, Lito's Pizza is top notch. It's, well, I'll get distracted if I start talking about the pizza. It's a unique pizza. It's flaky. It's one of the things, the crust is kind of flaky like a pie. And it's square. Yeah. Okay. All right, so back to the point here. The argument's not valid. And the reason why it's not valid is because we can imagine situations where the premises are true and the conclusion's false. So if we go the way the rule is set up, the way the rule is worded, if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true, which means every time the premises are true, the conclusion has to be true. And what we did there is we were actually able to imagine situations where that's not correct. We imagine situations where the premises are true. So what if Scott's like that? What if Scott's like that, where every time there's pizza, he's at the cafeteria, he's happy? And what if he's happy? Would it have to be the case that pizza's served? No. He could be happy because his kids were nice to him, or because he got a $5 bonus, or because someone brought him, Lito's Pizza, or something else like that. All right. So if we can imagine situations where the premises are true and the conclusion's false, then we know right away that the argument's not valid. And so we can actually, at that point, just jump right away and say that, so the argument is not good. And so notice here, you don't even have to get into Rule 1. You don't have to talk about whether or not the premises are reasonable, because it's got to have, both rules have to be followed in order for it to be good, and as long as it screws up one of the rules, you're done. So this was kind of quick. Okay. Questions about this one? We're grooving here? All right, not too hard? All right, I'm going to change things up a little bit. We'll play the game one more time here. And then I want to talk to you about a shortcut. So what I'm going to do is insert some knots into this argument. All right, so we're playing the game again for Rule 2. So I'm asking you, if the premises are true, does the conclusion have to be true? This one, I'll just give you a warning, this one's a little hard. So look at this one. Ask yourself, if the premises are true, does the conclusion have to be true? Or in other words, is it valid? Say what? All right, great question. When I'm asking you about Rule 2, what I'm asking you to do is to pretend that these two premises are true. And then the question is, if they're true, does this have to be true? So I'm not asking you if you believe this. I'm asking you, if these ideas are true, would this have to be true? If this is informal, obviously, this couldn't be more informal, this poll. But it looks pretty 50-50 to me. This is a hard one. All right, you ready for the answer? All right, answer is it's valid. It is actually valid. All right, so a lot has to do with the first premise. So the first premise is basically saying whenever pizza is served in the cafeteria, Scott is happy. Now you may not believe that, and we talked about why we may not believe that, but for rule 2, we're pretending that that's true. So what we're pretending is every single time there's pizza, pizza in the cafeteria, I'm happy. Every single time. All right, so what's premise 1 saying? Premise 1 is basically saying whenever there's pizza, he's happy. Then premise 2 says not happy. Well, if I'm not happy, then there can't be pizza. All right, so let's think about that again. Let's see if I can put it to you in a different way. Number 1 is basically guaranteeing every single time there's pizza, he's going to be happy. So one way of looking at that is there's never going to be a situation in which there's pizza and he's unhappy. If you then find out that I'm unhappy, then there's no way that there could be pizza. Because if there were pizza, I'd be happy. So these premises do in fact guarantee the truth of the conclusion. But I will tell you that this is a hard one. And the next thing I'm gonna do after this is I'm gonna show you a shortcut for doing rule 2 so that we can handle these hard ones in a much easier fashion. This one's hard, and there's another way to do it. We just did it the long way. All right, so what are we saying? It's a valid argument. All right. Now, what about rule 1? Are the premises reasonable for you to believe? So now we're kind of being realistic about it. Are the premises reasonable for you to believe? What do you think? No. All right, good. No's. Number of no's. All right, why no? What's the problem?
There are multiple situations in which you can't be happy.
Multiple situations where
You can't be happy.
I'm not happy, okay, even though there's pizza?
Yeah.
Right, and we talked about that, right? So, car accident, wrong kind of pizza. What was the other one? Dog died. Oh my gosh. The poor dog. Excellent. So what we would say about this one is that it's valid, but not good, because premise 1 is not reasonable. Excellent. Hey, what about premise 2? Scott's not happy. What do you think? Do you believe that?
No one's always happy.
Say what?
No one's always happy.
Okay. No one's always happy, so I could be unhappy. Yeah, so there's a question of kind of how to interpret this sentence. When it says Scott's not happy, does that mean sometimes Scott's not happy? Does that mean all the time Scott's not happy? Or, this is the way I'm interpreting it, right now Scott's not happy. I think when people make declarative sentences like that, I think what they mean is like at that moment. All right, so now that we're clarifying it, what it means is right now Scott's not happy. Is it reasonable for you to think that I'm not happy? Why not?
There's no.
Is there any evidence that I'm not happy?
Is there any evidence that you're happy?
Can't prove it.
Is there any evidence that I'm happy? How about that?
Pizza's being served.
Pizza. How do you know whether or not I'm happy?
Demeanor.
You look at me. So look at me now. How do I look? Unhappy, happy?
Energetic and excited.
That's what I'm talking about. I don't think I look unhappy. And I'll tell you now, I'm not unhappy. So you have multiple bits of evidence. Like, so you can look at my demeanor, and I don't seem to be unhappy. If I was kind of slouching and I came in like, man, you can do some rules today, I guess. Like, I seem to be, excited about what we're talking about, and I'm telling you that when I think about it, I actually feel happy right now. So you have various bits of evidence. So what I would say is that this is one where it's not good because premise 1 and premise 2 are not reasonable. Now, it just takes one premise to be messed up in order for it to not be a good argument. This one happens to have two premises that are messed up, so it's kind of a couple problems going for it. But all right, so like I said, this is the long way. I'm getting ready to tell you a shortcut. But before we jump into the shortcut, I want to highlight a difference between Rule 1 and Rule 2 so that we can kind of keep them separate in our mind here. I need to find room to write this difference.
Excuse me, I have a good question.
Yeah, what's up?
So it can be valid but not good because the two premises were not true.
Excellent. Very well put. So an argument, and this one is just like that, an argument can be valid, meaning, and notice that in this class, valid has a very particular meaning, right? So valid means if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. So it can be valid, but then not a good argument because it messes up Rule 1, which is what the last argument did, yeah. So a lot of times, when normal people use the word valid, what they mean is something like it's justified or warranted, or they might think like sound. In this class, valid doesn't mean that. Valid means this very particular thing, that if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. So that's a kind of particular definition we have in here. Yes?
So in other words, that makes sense in a way?
What are you saying, valid?
Yeah.
Yeah, valid. Valid means that there's a good connection between the ideas and the conclusion. The connection needs to make sense. So that's a good segue, because what I wanted to talk about is the difference between these two premises is that with premise 2, what you do is you pretend that the premises are true, and then you focus on the logical connection. So what you're doing here with Rule 2 is you pretend the premises are true. What if? What if they were true? But your focus is really on the connection between the premises and the conclusion. Here, you do what people call get real. That's so funny that people say that. And it makes sense. Like when people say get real, like they're basically saying, let's be realistic here. All right. So here we're pretending that the premises are true, and we're asking a what if question. What if the premises were true? Would that mean the conclusion would have to be true? That's the question. Here we get real, and we ask, are the premises really true? In the last argument we had, it obeyed this rule. The logical connection was good, but when we did the get real test, it wasn't. It wasn't realistic. Because 1, I don't seem to be unhappy, and 2, we can imagine scenarios where even though it's pizza, I'm not happy. So that didn't seem to be realistic. All right, so you got this. Rule 1 is about reality. Rule 2 is about logic. Okay? All right. So now I'm going to give you a shortcut for Rule 2. We've been doing it the long way, the way that uses a lot of brain space. All right, now I'm going to give you all the shortcut for doing it. The shortcut's a little weird at first because you're going to break the argument down into a pattern. But once you get used to being able to do that, you'll find it's a whole lot quicker. All right, so let me go back to the original argument we had. If pizza Okay, so the shortcut involves breaking the argument down into a pattern. So you look for patterns, right? And the way you look for patterns with an argument that's got words is you look for words repeated. All right, so what do you see repeated in this thing? Pizza served, and what else?
Happy.
Scott's happy. That's it. It's pretty simple. So pizza served is repeated twice. Scott's happy. Same deal. All right, so we've got things repeated, and we want to give it a pattern. And I'll tell you that the way you give it a pattern, there are lots of ways to do it. Some people use letters. Some people use numbers. Some people use shapes. Some people use colors. It's totally random. Either way is cool. I happen to use letters, and I like the letter to start with P. Why? Doesn't matter. It's just me. Other people have the letter start with A. I used to have the letter start with X. Either way, it doesn't matter. So I'm going to say pizza served in the cafeteria is P. Okay? And the next letter after that is Q. So I'm going to have Scott is happy be Q. All right, so what's number 2? What letter? P. And number 3 is Q. All right, so the pattern for this argument is if P, then Q, P, therefore Q. Now, there are lots of other arguments that could follow the same pattern. Let me give you another argument. Let's do this the long way real quick, because actually the long way here won't take too long, and then I'll show you all the shortcuts. So let's play the game again for rule 2. So look at this one, and I'm asking you, if the premises are true, does the conclusion have to be true? So look at number 1 and number 2. Does that have to be true? Tell me what you think. If we pretend that the premises are true, does the conclusion have to be true? Yeah? Yeah. A lot of yeses. Yeah, I think for this one, because it's more about location, where the other one was about sort of my emotion, my being happy or not, I think location's a bit more concrete. And for this one, we can pretty quickly say, yeah, if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. So this one's valid. All right, now let's use the shortcut. So with the shortcut, we're going to break it into a pattern. All right, now you see words repeated, right? Same as before. Scott's in flow 320 is repeated. So what letter could we give that? P, right? And he's in Raleigh. He's in Raleigh. Q, same pattern. Now we could do this all day, but we're not going to do that, right? I'm going to stop with just 2 examples, because really it just takes 2 examples to see that the moral of the story here is that any argument that follows that pattern is going to be valid every single time. However you want to word it, that is going to be a valid pattern every time. Here's the one. What did we start off with? If President Ralph is dancing in his office, then today's Wednesday. President Ralph is dancing in his office, therefore today's Wednesday. It's valid. Now again, just because it's valid, right, just because it obeys this doesn't mean it's good, right, because it's got to also have reasonable premises. But we can tell with just by looking at the pattern that it's valid. All right, let's do it with another one. The other one we had, all right, yeah, let's go. This one, you'll remember, we said this one was valid, but it was a hard one, right? And when I did a little poll, it's like half and half on this one. Because this is hard to kind of wrap your head around this one. But when we use the method where you put it into a pattern, it's quicker to see this one. The one weird thing is we've got to figure out what to do with the knots. So once we get that figured out, this one's not too bad. So we've got pizzas served in the cafeteria. That's going to be P again. Scott's happy is going to be Q. So here's a question for you guys. How should we word that? If we're putting it into a pattern, Scott's not happy. How should we put that?
Negative Q, yes.
Good. Right? Because it's basically denying Q. All right, negative Q. So there are different ways to put that. One is you could say negative Q. Another thing is you could say not Q. Sometimes people use a little tilde Q, and I'll tell you, there's any of those ways is fine. All right, it's just a matter of you deciding how you want to put the pattern. I usually, just because it's kind of short and I don't have to use a funny symbol, I just say not Q. So I'm just going to go with that, but it's the same as what you're saying. All right, so not Q, because it's basically just denying that. All right, so then what's 3? Not P. All right, so we got another pattern. We got P and Q, not Q. Therefore, P. That one's valid. Now, like I said, you can do this for other arguments too. The other one that has to do with location, again, I think is a little easier to see. Yeah, what's up?
What if it's P then not Q, then Q, therefore it's not P?
All right. Lay that on me again. So it's if P,
Then not Q.
then not Q. Okay. What's next?
2 is
Q. Then,
Q. So 3 would have to be not P.
yes,
Oh.
that works too. Absolutely.
So when is it not?
Wait a minute. Yeah, that works. Because basically, Q is the denial of not Q, right? So you see the pattern here where when you deny the then part, it allows you in the conclusion to deny the if part, which is what happens here. We deny the then part, which allows us to deny the if part. Yeah, so that one's cool. All right, so what do we have? We got if Scott is in 1-20, then all right, so this one follows the same pattern as this one. And doing it the long way, look at this one real quick and ask yourself, is it valid? What do you think about that? Just doing it the long way without the letters. Does that seem valid? Yeah, I think so. And again, this one I think is easier to see because it's just about where you're at, right? So if I'm in flow 120, then I'm in Raleigh. And by the way, I actually think that's true because I don't think there's another flow 320 in any other part of the world. That's kind of cool to think about. Flo is named after a person, Mary Laura Flo. And so really flow 320 is short for Mary Laura Flo Building, room 320. And I don't think there's any other Mary Laura Flo building in any other part of the world. Isn't that, I think, I don't know, maybe that's me. I think it's cool that we're in a unique location. So anyway, I believe number one, that if I'm in flow 320, then I'm in Raleigh, because it's the only place. Now, what if I'm not in Raleigh? Then I can't be in flow 320, right? Because there's only the one flow 320, and it's in Raleigh. Okay, so this one, when we do it the long way, we find that it's valid. And when we do it the short way, we'll find the same thing. Scott's in flow 320 is going to be P. Scott's in Raleigh is going to be Q. What's that going to be? Scott's not in Raleigh. Not Q. Good. And what about that? Not P. There's the pattern. It's valid. Yes.
What if you don't know if there's only one flow 320?
All right. What if you don't know that? In terms of Rule 2, it's still going to be valid. But in terms of Rule 1, you would probably say it's not good because you're not sure about premise 1. So premise 1 is really where that hinges, right? That hinges on that, right? Because premise 1 is basically guaranteeing every single time I'm in flow 320, I'm in Raleigh. If there's some other flow 320 out there, then we wouldn't believe number 1. But that would be relevant to Rule 1, not Rule 2. So Rule 2 is going to be valid for this one anyway. Now, I will tell you that the first time I learned this, now I'm not saying you should be feeling this too, but I'm just going to share how I felt the first time I learned about this. I got really excited. Now, here's why. Because once you learn how to break ideas down into patterns, and what it gives you is the ability to quickly decide whether or not an argument's good without even knowing what it's saying. All right, let's think about that. A lot of times you'll read something, and at least in my case, I'll be reading something and I'm not sure what the words mean. It's using like funny jargon or something like that. So I could break out the dictionary and go try to figure out what all these words mean, or I could look at what those words are saying, put them into a pattern, and see if it's valid. If it's not valid, then I know that it's not good, and I don't have to worry about what the words mean. So now when I hear someone say something, or if I read it, I can listen for the pattern and try to hear if it's a valid pattern or not. If it's a valid pattern, then I'm going to do the next step, which is to try to figure out what it's saying. But if it's not valid, I'm done with that. I don't even need to worry about that. So I kind of found this as a student when I was doing all the reading. As you know, you got to do a lot of reading. When I was doing all this reading, I was like, man, do I need to read this or not? I mean, what, there's so much to read. There's not enough time in your life, honestly, to read everything out there. So you've got to find ways to select what's worthy of reading or not, right? And so I found this to be super liberating. It now helps me decide, is it valid or not? If it's not, I'm not going to try to even figure out what it means. Now, these are two examples of valid arguments. There was an invalid argument that we saw that had this pattern: if P, then Q, Q, therefore P. All arguments that have this pattern are going to be invalid every single time. So, using this idea, if Scott's in flow 320, he's in Raleigh. He's in Raleigh, therefore he's in flow 320. What's the problem with that?
There are a lot of places you could be in Raleigh.
Right, just because I'm in Raleigh doesn't mean I'm in flow 320. So lots of arguments can follow this pattern, and I'll tell you, it's always going to be invalid. And on top of that, I'll tell you that this pattern right here is very popular. A lot of people use this pattern. They use this way of reasoning, but it's not valid. Commercials are good for this stuff. A lot of times the idea that the commercial's trying to give you is that if you it'll be like, if the person uses the product, then these really good things will happen to the person. And then they show images of the really good things happening to the person. And so the conclusion we're supposed to draw is it must be the product. Old Spice got a commercial like that. And it's a funny commercial, but it's invalid, right? Just if you use the product, then the good things are going to happen. Good things happen, therefore it's the product? No. Good things could be happening because you're in a commercial making money. I mean, it's not necessarily the product. When you listen to the politicians, as you're going to be doing soon, if you haven't already, you will hear a number of short arguments. And unfortunately, when they're doing debates or if they're up, in a speech, a lot of times they have to be short. They have to be concise. So they'll give you short little arguments, and pay attention to the patterns of the arguments that you're being given. And I'll tell you that, just because they're running for president, it doesn't mean that they're always going to be giving you valid patterns. So listen up for the patterns that you hear, and you can tell right away if it's obeying Rule 2. And again, even if it's obeying Rule 2, it doesn't necessarily mean it's good, because it might be the premises aren't reasonable. But it's good to know. Questions about the 2 rules for a good argument? Again, today is basically just practicing the rules. We're just trying to learn about the rules. We had these silly, kind of unimportant arguments. After today, we're going to talk about more serious arguments. In particular, next time it's going to be, we're going to look at an argument for the existence of God. And we'll basically be applying these rules, not just in class, but also with the paper. All right, I'm going to press stop.